This is Coach Jason Ballard, and I'm a business wingman. Over the years, I've learned a lot from working in our family construction business, serving as a senior officer in the United States Air Force, and running 12 different organizations around the world. Many people helped me get to where I am today, and it's my mission in life to serve as a personal wingman to others. That's what this podcast is all about, providing knowledge, tools, resources, and mentorship to help people soar to their highest altitude. And welcome back to the Soar Higher podcast. This is your host, Coach Jason Ballard, and it's a real privilege to be with you today. Got another great episode in store for you today. We have a phenomenal guest that I think you're going to love. Today, we're talking about something that's needed more than ever, something that is the absolute pinnacle of success in anybody's organization today, and that topic is leadership. You know, it's easy when everything's going well, it's easy to be a leader. You know, things are happening, people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, the economy's going well, everybody's making money, everybody's getting promoted, but it's easy to be a leader when things go well. It's when things don't go well, don't go with the plan, that things become hard. You have to improvise, you have to adapt, you have to be flexible, you have to kind of reassess and figure out where you're at, what happened, and what next steps are. And that can be a real challenge. And so today we have the privilege of having a man named Shawn Dawley, who is a leadership expert and keynote speaker on this topic, how to lead through challenging times. And I think that's a pertinent topic today. A lot of people are struggling in a lot of different ways. And so we're so glad to have you on the show. Shawn, welcome to the show, my friend.
Jason, thanks so much for having me, brother. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to this.
Yeah. So it's an honor to have you. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to talk just a quick minute here about Shawn and give you some background on this fine young man here. 25-year Air Force veteran. He was a pilot. He was a commander. He served overseas. He served all over the world, actually, in combat and out of combat. He's also worked for a number of Fortune 500 companies as a senior leader, helping them navigate through some very tough transitions, and now owns his own company called OT2. We'll learn more about that here in a minute. Consulting, OT2 Consulting, where he helps them with leadership and emotional intelligence and train the next generation of leaders to lead the organization's moving in a very positive direction. So, Shawn, you have been literally around the world, have been in a lot of different situations. One, thank you for your service to our country for 25 years. And it's always great to have a fellow Air Force veteran on the show as well. You're doing some amazing work. So thank you for everything you've done for all the people you've helped so far.
Well, thank you for saying all of that. And you said too many things for me to correct. So the one thing I'll focus on was opening up with calling me a young man. That's a very relative term there, buddy. And why I choose to keep moving the goalposts as I age, I'm staring down 50, which to my understanding is the new 21, if I think I heard it right. You, like most things in life, right? Our resume is a lot like tombstones in a graveyard. It only kind of captures the good highlights. Missing from some of those accolades are enough mistakes for a novel that I made along the way. So while I do appreciate the setup, it's not false modesty. All that time I spent going around the world and operating various leadership capacities, it really has provided a lot of opportunities to learn from some mistakes made along the way. So I'm just trying to pass along those lessons now.
Absolutely. And, what I've learned, mindset is everything. Mindset is the backdrop for leadership. And so if you keep telling yourself and you keep showing up and you act young, look young, and work hard to keep up with the youngsters of the world, therefore that implies you are younger. And so I'm the same age as you, and I consider myself still a young man. So
There you
therefore
go.
you're still a young man. And so it's just a number. It's how you feel. It's how you show up and how
Yeah.
you play the game. And so I know you well enough to know that you show up, give 100% every day and fight the good fight. So anyway, for what that's worth,
I appreciate that.
let's kind of break into the show here. Let's dig into some things.
Yeah, right on.
Tell us a bit about your background, a little bit about your journey. Why did you get in the Air Force, and where is that journey taking you?
I was a horribly misbehaved young man. When I graduated high school at 17, I knew that I had enough intellectual aptitude that I could go to college, but what was lacking was the critical maturity such that if I were to go simply from high school to, being released into the wild with nobody to keep me in check, it would have been an utter disaster. I'm not going to maybe go down the rabbit hole of how I became to become, such a misguided youth. My childhood wasn't exactly Norman Rockwell, but I was born in America of sound mind and body to a mother who loved me. So triple lottery winner. I had enough to not blame my circumstances for some of my behavior, but the net effect of my youth was that I was not well poised, to succeed without structure. And I had just enough sense to know how immature and irresponsible I was, right? I had just enough common sense to know that I needed that. And a teacher who was critical in my development said, you might want to look into the Air Force. And I'm not parochial. I truly believe that every service absolutely has its own value. It just so happened that somebody I looked up to had been in the Air Force, and I took what they said with a lot of gravity. So I enlisted in the Air Force, stepped off that bus at Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, as a scared 17-year-old that probably weighed 145 pounds, soaking wet. And kind of as they say, the rest is history. One thing, though I lacked the vocabulary at the time to use words like meritocracy, I had this epiphany early in boot camp when we're back and we are very busy straightening our cots and folding our linens, and in all that stress and manufactured pressure that the drill instructors heap upon you, I remember looking up and it hit me. Everybody is dressed the exact same, tasked with the exact same responsibility, with the same buzz cuts and dog tags hanging off around their neck. And on some level, it resonated with me that it doesn't matter if he came from money, if he came from nothing, where they started in life. We're all here now, and you are going to sink or swim based on your own energy and effort. And so one thing the Air Force provided me as that misguided youth was it freed me, it liberated me from the prison of excuses I had built for myself, because suddenly none of that mattered. In that environment, you're just one of 55 other young men that are all challenged every day the same way. And so once I was sort of, liberated from that little prison I'd built for myself, because I didn't have this, because I didn't have that, woe is me, I no longer was able to throw the pity party. And so that allowed me to kind of flip that proverbial switch. And once I began to apply myself, it was just amazing, the amount of untapped potential that resides in everybody once they decide to channel it. So that was basically that transitional moment in my life. And then from that point forward, I just, was an aircraft mechanic, not real good at it. Didn't have much of a mechanical aptitude. I tell people, as a pilot later in life, it's a lot easier to break them than it is to fix them, right? So, but the Air Force allowed me to endeavor to attain an education. I was going to night school and taking classes on the weekends. And once I earned my degree in aeronautics, applied to become a pilot, and I guess you could say the rest is history.
Yeah. What did you fly in the Air Force?
After pilot training, primarily C-130s, and that was kind of baked in early on. Being from Louisville, there's an Air National Guard base here in the hometown that has C-130s in the inventory, and so by going to U.S. Air Force pilot training, but assigned to that unit and mission set, I would be able to spend the preponderance of my operational career in Louisville, which meant when I would deploy to, operations for the Balkans or Afghanistan or Iraq or anywhere else on the planet, my family was here. My nuclear family was here, surrounded by, grandma and grandpa, aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters. So that was really fortunate. That was very fortunate.
Well, again, we thank you for your service. Being a pilot is not easy, especially flying, those types of planes and delivering troops and cargo to places that are pretty dangerous places all around the world. So thank you again for your service there. Talk to us a little bit about, you grew up as a pilot on the officer side after you were enlisted for a few years. When did you start getting into leadership? Talk to us, about some of your first couple of leadership experiences and where you were and what you did with that.
Right. Whereas the profession of piloting is a pretty formulaic and structured career path, just like most any other professions, right? I mean, if you want to be an architect or an engineer or an attorney, there's a relatively, narrow pathway that you're funneled through to attain your professional credentials. Leadership, quote unquote, is much more nebulous. How does one become a leader, right? Because we have leaders of Fortune 100 companies and we have leaders of Girl Scout troops and everything right in between. So early on, as an officer, which is more of the, leadership, focus, I was so busy with what I did, which was piloting airplanes, that I didn't really have this deliberate approach to leading, which as an officer is more of who you are. And yet for some reason, known only to them, pretty early in my career, some wiser elders up the chain of command, they saw something in me and they plucked me kind of early from the herd and put me in leadership positions. And that actually began in officer candidate school when, and again, this isn't false modesty. I to this day can't tell you what the reasoning was, but my peers had nominated me to be the cadet commander, and then the actual adults at that institution said, yeah, we want this guy. Of the 100 cadets, we're going to pick this guy to be the student commander with whatever that title was. And really from that point forward, a trend that developed was that every time I found myself in a new organization, in a new capacity, I kept getting asked or pulled into these leadership jobs. And these weren't roles for which I was politicking or trying to position myself. And it was maybe like the fourth or fifth time that I was asked to take over in a leadership role. I thought, maybe there's something to this. Maybe there's something that I'm doing right. And whatever it was, whatever modicum of, talent I had, to lend to these jobs was arrived at after a lot of growth, because that was not the case in my youth. I was not asked by the faculty in high school to be class president. There was a lot of things that they would not want me to do in my youth, but along the way, through some personal growth and development, I picked up, I guess, this basic, pretty easy, simple set of tools that other leaders, like mature, established leaders, could kind of recognize. Okay, this guy's raw clay. We can work with that. So the first few jobs were, low level leadership assignments. But one of the things that I can now tell people is to never be dismissive of how lowly you think your leadership role is, because there is nothing that helps you develop as a leader like actual leadership experience. We can read about it. We can watch movies about it. We can even watch other people do it. But if you are asked as a high schooler to be the assistant captain on the girls' lacrosse team, young lady, do it, because any repetition you get when you are thrust into a leadership capacity, what you'll find as you go up to higher and higher elevated levels of authority is that it's basically the same problems with just a different vocabulary. Like as I went up the chain and I was a commander or a corporate vice president, you think, okay, at some point I'm going to arrive at this echelon of leadership where this brand new strategic spectrum of challenges are going to await me. And you really don't. As a vice president or a C-suite executive or a military commander, if I had two senior people that were always fighting like cats and dogs and undermining one another, it was no different than when I was a very junior leader and I had, two second lieutenants that just, couldn't get along. It's the same problems manifest up and down the chain of command. They just tend to sometimes have different magnitudes or different lexicons attached to them. But yeah, those first few leadership jobs were invaluable. I mean, so much of what I learned happened in those first 2 or 3 jobs, not the last 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, as a leader in the military myself and a leader outside of the military, I can tell you, I know why they liked you and they picked you and why you got down that path. It's very simple. You have innate leadership qualities about you: morals, values, principles, doing the right things. You're open, you learn, you take charge. You can't just sit on the sidelines and just watch something happen that's not going well, right? You have more to give. You see the bigger picture. You're strategic minded. And leaders take action. You can be a leader in church. You can be a leader on the Boy Scout team. You can be a leader in the military. You can be a leader anywhere.
That's
a
right.
leader just means you have the ability to affect change and influence people around you to affect change together as a team. And that are certainly qualities. I know I've gotten to know you well enough to know those are definitely evident. You can see that a mile away. That's just part of your demeanor, part of your personality, is you're a problem solver.
Yeah.
And so you clearly excelled in the military. It's a great organization to be and grow up and be groomed as a leader. And you've done well in the military, made it up through the ranks. We're a commander. I mean, a commander is like CEO of an organization. You're responsible for all things, budgets, contracts, hiring, firing, all of those things, just like any CEO would be. And you did a heck of a job as a leader there, and then out in the corporate sector as well. So I want to transition. You've been a leader for a long time in different environments and different situations, looking at things holistically in our economy and our world that we live in today. What are some of the top leadership challenges that you're seeing more commonly than none?
We're living in an increasingly disconnected world. The promise of technology to bring us all together, I think, has actually been rather antithetical, to that. Now, I say that as a man sitting on the other end of a camera that's allowing us to have a conversation as if we're in the same room. So this would be one of those examples that big tech would offer up as the beauty of modern technology. But at the same time, you can imagine a scenario, whether it's in the household or in the workspace, where technology allows us to live these more and more virtual lives, and we humans are neuroanatomically wired to really only bond when we are in like physical proximity to one another. When I was a director in a large Fortune 100 company, I was leading a department that it was spread. Its operational footprint was spread over 33 states. And so there was no way feasibly that we could all be physically co-located. And that was the first leadership job I had where we were significantly geographically separated. So even like though there were some levels between me and, where the rubber met the road, you never shared real estate with people. You didn't get to bump into them at the water cooler. And again, that was just simply how it had to be. I have a concern that while the pendulum does seem to be swinging back, it's one thing for two guys like us who got to cut our teeth coming up in organizations face to face to then transition to a virtual work environment. I have some concerns about future, like the next 2 or 3 generations of leaders who maybe get to those elevated positions of authority as directors or vice presidents, where they maybe had spent a significant amount of their time working remote, working from home, working from anywhere. Because I feel like so much of my personal growth and development tended to happen in the margins. It tended to happen with those happenstance conversations, or maybe a senior leader's about to walk in for some high level meetings, says, hey, young man, why don't you come in here with me? I want you to sit on the back row and just kind of listen. I don't know that we're getting that. And again, I don't want to be the cranky old man saying, get off my line. I don't like progress. I recognize that there are some logistical challenges to a globally interconnected commercial working environment. But one big challenge, I think, is that so much leadership growth and development tends to happen face to face, over lunch, at the water cooler, and through those fortuitous circumstances that allow you to pick up some mentorship here and there. So that to me seems to be the enduring leadership development problem that seems to cut across most white collar professions. I mean, the foreman who's overseeing a crew doing road construction, they're still leading on site. They're still developing their leadership skills in the real world. Yeah. And so there's just certain professions. Basically, if you can do your job at a keyboard, there can be a tendency to get more and more separation there. And I think that can create some leadership development challenges, going forward.
Yeah, certainly the dynamics of today have created an environment where you have to lead differently, for sure, right? But it kind of takes me back to the movie Dodgeball, right? When they were practicing and trying to figure out how to, become dodgeball players, these people from, different walks of life create a dodgeball team with Vince Vaughn. The old master that was in the wheelchair would throw a wrench at him. It's like, hey, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball, right? Yeah. Well, I think the same thing's true in the leadership realm too, right? A leader is a leader. Theoretically, a leader should be able to lead in any situation, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's virtually, in person, or anything in between. And so what I'm seeing, I agree with everything you're saying. I just wanted to add a couple of pieces to that I think are important, because leadership is your ability to be dynamic, because the world changes very fast around us. Like some people you may see more often than others. Some people you're leading from a virtual environment that are in different places, different cultures, different backgrounds. I have certainly been in that situation myself. And as a leader, I can sit there and say, hey, I'm the leader. Everybody adapt to me. Mm-hmm. And talk in my language and do things my way on my timeline, right? But as a leader of people that are in different states, time zones, backgrounds, cultures, diversity, you name it, you have to adapt and find ways to connect with them. Everybody's not going to cater to you. And I think your ability to be dynamic, to meld into situations and show up as a leader. People are like, yeah, but it's hard on Zoom. We're on Zoom calls, mm-hmm. and there's only so much you can do, only so much you can say. It's not the same as being in person. You're right. It's not the same. However, change how you lead on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
When you're on Zoom, for example, you need to communicate more clearly. You need to be more organized. You
Mm-hmm.
need to communicate more often on Zoom and follow up because the communication isn't the same. And so you've got to
Yeah,
adapt and make that work where everybody's clear and understands the expectations, and you mix it up between group and individual. There's lots of different things you can do as a
sure.
leader to connect with people on that leadership, on the various levels you need to connect with them.
That's right.
I think some of the most interesting leadership development opportunities that I had growing in leadership roles, and even people working for me in leadership roles, are the days where people would either knock on the door, call you on the phone, or somehow contact you and say, "Hey, do you have a minute?"
Yep, that's
That's
right.
always followed by some kind of challenge. Somebody's stuck, somebody's going
Yeah.
through a tough time, or some issue in their life, a death in the family, or
Mm-hmm.
something.
Right.
And they just feel what they feel. They're in that place, and they just need something from the leader, just an ear to listen, or just some advice, or just something.
Sure.
And every time somebody comes to you and says, "Do you have a minute?"
Mm-hmm.
That's a leadership opportunity for yourself, as well as the other people that you may be talking with. It's a leadership opportunity. So I'm sure you've had many of those
Oh,
conversations yourselves, huh?
yeah, brother, I'm telling you. And so you're speaking my language. Typically when you are about to, venture into a new leadership job, you are thinking through the litany of operational, logistical, administrative, financial challenges that are laid out in front of you. And you begin to think in terms of the algebraic approach to solving all of those problems, which you should, right? One of your principal managerial jobs is to uh, assess the challenge at hand, assess the opportunities at hand, look at your resources, and most effectively and efficiently allocate them to solve or take advantage of that spectrum of issues. That's your managerial obligation. But then the art of leadership is going to be things like you just described, because if you've done your part to create this aura about you where people have picked up on a vibe that, you know what, the boss is most definitely aware of what I do, but I get the impression he actually cares about who I am. And all too often, the
Yeah.
busier we get, especially in a very metric driven environment in which we unapologetically will find ourselves, we get so busy keeping the trains running on time. As we're practicing the science of management, we're neglecting the art of leadership, such that when you walk past somebody in the hallway, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you say, "How you doing?" And they say, "Great." And then on Friday, you say, "How you doing?" They say, "Not so bad." And you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, that's different. And then because you've got some emotional intelligence and you've got some degree of empathetic awareness, you discern that subtle shift. And what do you know? 30 minutes later, you've had the most important conversation, not just of their week, but of your week, because they disclose, yeah, my husband and I just found out that our son may have condition X, Y, and Z, and we're really worried about it. And they
Mm.
perhaps were struggling to let anybody know that, because heaven forbid you as the boss think that them as a resource is suddenly going to be less productive. And they were maybe worried about that getting out, but you took the opportunity to look past their job title and just look at them as a human being worthy of value, and let them know, hey, look, right now, I know that who you are that shows up to work is the sum total of everything going on in your life. And understandably, this is more important to you right now than punching the clock. And if they somehow sincerely believe that you care about that issue that's weighing on them and their family, And that not only do you have to worry about your production slowing down, no, I'm turning it around. You let me know in my capacity as your leader, what can I do to make your life a little bit easier for the next days, weeks, months, whatever that timeline is. Well, I happened to figure out over the years that even though I might have approached that for altruistic reasons, not in a manipulative way, it just so happened that when the time does come down the road in a workplace context and you need that person to run through a brick wall, boy, they're much more likely to do it. As a matter of fact, half the time they're looking for opportunities to what they think pay it back. They don't owe you anything, right? In your mind, you don't owe me a thing. But that's the type of workplace culture that we as leaders should be creating. And we can do that as me being a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, keeping an eye on the bottom line. At the end of the day, I want to make a profit. I want to make money. Yeah. As an Air Force commander, come heck or high water, we are launching this sortie. We are doing this mission, but it doesn't have to be by breaking the backs of the people that have been entrusted to our care. So what you just said in that lead up to my little monologue there, Jason, is exactly how I eventually approached it, which is keep one eye on the management of the operation, but always keep the other eye on the leadership of the people who at the end of the day are the most important resource in the organization.
Absolutely. I remember it's not every day as a leader you get feedback from people that's, hey, you're awesome. Hey, thank you for all the great mentorship you're giving me, boss, right? So being a leader sometimes, most of the time is a thankless job. You're not going to get a lot of praise and accolades from that. But every once in a while you'll come across a situation where you may actually get some very positive feedback. Reminds me of a quick story. Hard charging, good all-American, kick butt, take names, go-to person was working for me one time. And he came to me, hey, just want to let you know, we wrapped up this project. Everything's good to go, blah, 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 blah. And just kind of following up, circling the wagons. I said, hey, man, great. Good on you. Appreciate you doing that. Great job. Proud of you. Hey, by the way, before we leave here, I've got one question for you. Yeah, what's up, sir? Why do you work until 7:00 at night all the time? And he looked at me and those eyes got really big and I could tell he was like frozen. He did not know what to say. Mm-hmm. He's like, well, just working hard, got a lot of things going on, just busy. And I said, yeah, we're all busy, but you're busier than everybody else. What's going on? Mm-hmm. Do you suck at managing your time or not? No, I'm pretty good. I got a calendar, da 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 da. Okay, back to my question. How are you doing? And when I asked the question and I looked into his eyes, it's like he realized what I was asking without directly asking deeper question.
Right.
He would later break that down into a story where he was having some struggles on the home front. He didn't know how to deal with it. It was not going well. And so he poured his heart and work into work. That was his identity.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of conversations about that. And about a year and a half later, I was leaving the organization, and at my going away party, he was the last person in the room. He comes up to me and there was nobody else around. Everybody else had walked out and we're kind of packing up, and I could just tell by his behavior he wanted to talk in private. And I said, hey man, how's it going? It's like, good. He said, I'll never forget you. I was like, well, hopefully that's for the good, not the bad. And I just kind of made a joke about it.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, it's for the good. He says, because today I stand before you different, changed, still married, and you cared enough to see something that nobody else saw and poured into that. And that changed my mindset, my way of thinking, opened up my mind to some different ways of thinking, and some changes occurred that changed some things in the personal side that was forcing me to work till 7 o'clock at night every night. And we talked for a few minutes, made a few jokes, we shook hands, and still to this day we do keep in touch. But I went home that night different. I was like, wow, it's not every day you get that kind of feedback. And it just goes to show you how important and how powerful being a leader can be. And so I want to springboard off of that story and off of your great testimony to ask you about some deeper things. You are known as somebody that can lead and help other people lead through challenging times, when things aren't easy, when things aren't going well, when things, all the sales numbers aren't, over the moon, and, hard, tough, challenging things are going on. Things are chaotic. You have figured out a way to lead and help other people lead through crisis, through challenges, through major transitions, and connect on the emotional intelligence level. So talk to us about that. Talk to us about what's different about leading when it's not easy versus when it's hard. Or I'm sorry, when it is easy versus when it's hard. I said that backwards. Talk to us about that and how you got into that and why you've made that such a focus of your work you're doing these days.
Well, that's a great segue, Jason. That previous story that you shared, where you had observed the who, the what, the when, the where, the how of that young officer. It wasn't until you stopped and actually asked why, and you peeled the onion back, that you figured out some of those deeper issues. In leadership, I agree with you. It's still important to exercise leadership when times are good, but when times are bad, leadership is never more critical. And in the nature of the profession that you and I both share, crisis leadership is unfortunately something that you sometimes get to practice. And what I think separates crisis leadership from just your typical day-to-day leadership challenges is that more so than ever, the currency of your approach is trust, because the defining attribute of crisis is ambiguity, right? I mean, as bad as the observable circumstances are, it's the fear of the unknown during a crisis which tends to engender the most apprehension and trepidation on the part of the troops, whether they be civilians in a commercial setting or, aviators in a combat squadron. And whereas you've got any number of procedures that can help you deal with the nuts and bolts of helping reconcile and rectify the crisis, the ambiguity that is associated with whatever that crisis is requires people on some level to just truly believe in their heart of hearts that, if I don't completely understand the boss's direction right now, I have no doubt that is coming from a man or woman that I can actually trust. Because when that proverbial fire or literal fire takes root, the amount of chaos that ensues is such that people are going to go like a 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato. And then if the person who is vested with formal authority doesn't begin to act, people will instinctively begin to look for somebody that provides direction. And so, not every emergency is a crisis. If it is something that is relatively foreseeable, if it is something that happens, relatively often, for which you have developed procedures, well, that's not a crisis. If it has a textbook answer, it's not a crisis. If I'm flying my aircraft and one of my engines catches on fire, I've got a 12-step process to deal with that. If I'm flying a low level and suddenly my plane gets lit up by a radar-guided surface-to-air missile battery, I've got a codified countermaneuver to deal with that. So the thing that seems to define a crisis is, okay, there's no book I can just pull off the shelf that's going to have steps A through F, to fix it. Now, there might be those first couple initial steps you can take to kind of get everybody pointed in the right direction, but in those tense situations, they want to believe that the person leading them is somebody who has earned their trust, and if that earning of trust doesn't begin until the moment of the crisis, it's way too late.
Well, I think trust is critical. In fact, I just came back from a conference, heard a guy named David Horsager speak, and he wrote a book and has whole leadership thing around this, and it's an 8-pillar set of components around trusted leaderships. And one of the things is, competency, consistency. There's 8 C words that surround being a trusted leader. And so some of the things that I've seen in quote unquote crisis situations where you have to act, it's unexpected, something happened that nobody was planning for. And now all of a sudden you've got to assess, you've got to take inventory, and you got to figure out what's going on. You've been overseas in the Middle East. I was in a situation one time where me and my team were pinned down by enemy gunfire, and we were in a very, very bad situation. We were outflanked. We were in the worst possible position to be in. And if we did not act, if we did not move instantly, we were in a kill zone, and our chances of survival would have been very, very small. We would have all been killed right there in that very same exact spot. And so immediately, once the situation happened, immediately I'm looking, scanning, and processing all of this information in my brain. And I'm like, we've got to move instantly. Within 5 seconds, I'm like, we've got to move. I'm looking at this. This is not, I trusted my training. I trusted my instincts, and I didn't think, I didn't use analysis paralysis. I just acted, and we pivoted. Guys, we're going from here to there. You cover this, we're going there. We cover you. We are going to take higher ground. And, thank God we acted when we acted, and we did what we did, and we got out of that situation. It was a true crisis. It was life and death. Yeah. And if I had to do it over again, I'd do it the same way. But I think a lot of people misunderstand, crisis, because it's different. It's different than normal day-to-day options. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're in crisis mode all the time, then you got to look in the mirror and ask yourself, are we leading? Is our culture in this company or organization right? So when you're working with people from your, company's perspective, are people really operating in crisis, or do they just think they're crisis because that's how we're conditioned to think? If something doesn't go perfectly, we're in crisis mode. What is some of your take from the organizations you're working with?
Yeah. Different professions are going to lend themselves to, more or less crisis style experiences than others. If you are in an industry and you feel like your company is going through crisis a lot more than your competitors, it could be something with you, right? It could be there are some internal processes,
good chance,
that probably need to be reassessed. And again, I think that we should probably orient around, a common definition of crisis. A crisis is not our competitor just launched a marketing blitz trying to gain more share away from our customers. Like, well, welcome to free market capitalism. Like that's how the game is played. That is not a crisis. Right. Nor is, hey,
you should be expecting that.
Exactly. So that would be a macro strategic level event that is to be expected. A crisis is not, we threw a belt on the assembly line and we shut down production till we repaired it. Well, it's a mechanical unit. It's going to break down. Like that is not a crisis. So for our purposes, a crisis, we can think of as just an abnormal shock to normal operations that will not resolve itself. And if left unaddressed, will probably make the situation worse in the long term. And so it might sound like a stretch, but a couple of months ago, my wife and I were with our daughter at Chuck E. Cheese. And for any listeners that aren't in the area that don't know what a Chuck E. Cheese is, it's an arcade swarming with a bunch of little rugrats under the age of like 7. The video games are geared towards toddlers and 5 and 6 year olds. And my granddaughter, who's 2, I choose to believe she loves me, but in the competition between me, my wife, and my daughter, I come in 3rd place every time, and it's not even close, right? Well, in my periphery, I suddenly see my granddaughter like bolting across the floor of this Chuck E. Cheese. And I watch her run past her mom, run past my wife, and she gets to me and she locks in her little claws to my waist, and her eyes are the size of silver dollars. And it's obvious she wants me to pick her up. And I pick her up and she whips her head back around and she sees the Chuck E. Cheese mascot like coming, waddling out from behind the curtain. So poor little girl, I mean, he's like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. Like she just, whatever Chuck E. Cheese is to you and I, to her, it was the incarnation of evil. And so we joke about that, in the family, but something magical happened. In a moment where, though we can laugh that she was frightened by this Chuck E. Cheese mascot, in her little mind, there was this existential threat to her safety. And she ran right past her mom and grandma and ran right to me, because on some level, her little limbic system inside of her brain, which is geared for survival, said, this guy over here, Papaw, will provide safety. Why do I bring that story up?
Yeah.
When we are under emotional duress, it is extremely hard to be at our intellectual best to solve problems and execute solutions if we don't feel safe, if we don't feel like we are in the confines of safety, it is hard for us to really be at liberty to do that higher level abstract thinking, to cognitively find our way out of a dilemma. So why do I tell that story? It's because I think the most important thing that you can do as a leader in a crisis is not provide the answers, but while with much sobriety, acknowledging the reality of today and all the problems that you're facing, somehow convey reassurance that somehow, some way, tomorrow will be brighter. You don't have to be the one that provides the top-down solution, but you need to provide some type of top-down reassurance. Because if the people that have the right answers, that are underneath, the guise of your leadership, if somehow, some way they feel safe, like, okay, I trust the boss, I trust that things will be better, suddenly they feel much more free and they feel safer to start engaging their minds and coming up with all of those solutions. So again, it's not being Pollyannish or naively optimistic, right? When all heck is breaking loose around you, it's not your job as a leader to pretend like it's not happening. But somehow you can't be Chicken Little running around, that the sky is falling, because now you've sort of like set the ceiling on how optimistic your team can be. It's hard to be more optimistic than the boss, right? So yeah, again, and I'm not trying to say that in a workplace setting, your grandpa and they're all a bunch of, scared 2-year-olds fearful of Chuck E. Cheese. I'm just saying that there is this innate, intrinsic human phenomenon that when we are under stress and duress, we will flee to the person that provides some degree of emotional sanctuary.
Yeah, that's a great story. Been to Chuck E. Cheese many times myself, and I'm glad to say I'm glad I don't have to go to Chuck E. Cheese for a while until I get grandkids. Oh man, we wore that place out. But what you're saying is absolutely true, right? At the end of the day, people have their own thoughts and emotions about what's going on. Losing a client, or somebody griping and complaining about your service, or you rub somebody the wrong way and you're afraid they're going to go talk to somebody and say negative things about you, or, whatever that may be, there's bad things are going to happen in the workplace, right? I mean, not every day is going to be a bright, sunny day.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be technology that breaks. There's going to be expectations that are missed. There's going to be people that don't get along or agree or, whatever, right? Things happen. And when they do, people need to know where they stand. If somebody really got in trouble for something, great. Hey, yeah, that's probably not the right way to do it. And we're going to have to deal with the consequences, but we'll work through it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I had a guy work for me one time, and he got a DUI. He drank too much, drove through some farmer's field, knocked down his fence, a couple cows got loose. Nobody got hurt, nobody died. It certainly could have been a lot worse, but this guy thought his career was over in the organization and was just worried and stressed. And after we dealt with the situation and moved on from it, this young man was given a lot of we'll call them additional duties. He needed to get back in the game. His confidence was down, and this guy was a high performing person, somebody we definitely needed on the team. He just made a couple of bad decisions.
Yeah, sure.
And failure is never forever, right? And so there was a point about a month and a half, 2 months later, he was cleaning up and doing some things, and it was late on a Friday afternoon. It was about 5:30. I was getting ready to leave, and I saw him working diligently, and I stopped in. Hey, how's it going? And we kind of had about a 10-minute conversation about how things were going. And he said, I just feel hopeless. I feel like my career's over. I'm just, doing things to barely hanging on. And I just don't know what to do. Before, I was motivated and working hard, doing great things. And I said, well, you're still the same person, right? Yeah. You still work hard, right? Yeah. You're still smart, right? Yeah. You're still growing and developing and learning. Yeah. Yeah. Still high aspirations for yourself, right? Capabilities are still there, right? Yeah. Okay. This is a speed bump. You work hard. Now, the thing is, you got to work harder than you did before. You got to work longer hours. You got to put in extra effort to rebound.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're an athlete and you get injured. You have to put in extra time, more than your teammates, to rehab, to develop those muscles again, to get back in the rhythm and bounce back 100%. It takes more effort than your peers. I said, but when you do, you'll go farther. I said, take this as a learning experience and go farther with it, because now you have more real world experience to lean on when you get in some tougher situations down the road. Well, this guy took off, and last time I heard, he was doing some pretty amazing things. And so recognizing that people need that calm, that reassurance that, okay, thanks for telling me about the really bad, ugly thing that happened, but what are our options? How do we prevent this? How do we move forward? What's out of 15 options we have, which one's our best one, right? And just methodically walking them through that, I found to be very, very helpful. And so, Shawn, my goodness, we could talk for another 2 hours. I need to get you on the show. We need to do some more deeper dives into emotional intelligence and some deeper conversation of this. And we'll definitely schedule that for a little later in the year. But as we kind of wrap up today, great information. Thank you so much for being here. What are maybe the top 3 things you want people to remember today, that they can take today and implement today, that can help them be a better leader going forward?
So I mentioned earlier that I was fortunate to be given some leadership opportunities right out of the chute. And I will tell you that my leadership style or styles were relatively limited. And I tended to be, I think, what might be called a pace setter, meaning I'm going to go afterburner speed and you all try to keep up. And I realized that that can work sometimes with the right people under certain circumstances. But as leaders, we have to grow and develop a wider range of situational leadership. And we want to achieve certain things. We never need to apologize for our ambitions if our ambitions are rooted in proper motivations. If your motivation is I want to be richer than anybody else, well, good luck. Don't know what kind of an impact you're going to have on the planet. But if you aspire to something for the right reasons, you don't need to apologize for what that is. Yet, as we aspire to those grander ambitions, I would ask people, okay, name your favorite teacher. They would think about it. They'd have their name. Then I would say, okay, name your favorite Secretary of Education. They're like, you know. So what happens is, as we go through life and we catalog the titles we want, the jobs we want, the roles we want, I always challenge people, think back to who that favorite teacher was. Think back to that favorite coach. Think back to that favorite neighbor, you know, the older man or woman down the street when you were a kid. And if you stop and think, why was that? Why out of all the teachers, all the coaches, all the neighbors, why that one? Why those two? Why those three people? And typically what you find is that what they all share in common was that they made you feel valued, respected, worthy. And I would challenge anybody in a position of leadership, if you think about what endeared you to your favorite Little League coach or what endeared you to your favorite middle school teacher, emulate those values and you'll be that much better of a chief physician, a CEO, and whatever title in which you find yourself. If you emulate the values of the people that you thought of most fondly, it's probably because they were doing things that were really the lowest hanging fruit. They listened to you, talked to you, empathized with you. And so I would just challenge everybody. Again, I get it. I know how busy so many of us are. And I understand that at the end of the day, we do live in a quantifiable workplace. We have to hit numbers. We have to hit revenue goals. We need to keep an eye on the profit and loss statement. But I think those things will tend to take care of themselves in the long run if we do the easy things, which is approach each day as leaders privileged to care for those entrusted to us.
Yeah, that is some great advice. Very practical, very easy to do, and you can implement it tomorrow and make, you know, small, even big impacts on people around you. You know, because everybody's challenged, everybody's busy, everybody's got a story, everybody's got things going on, and implementing those things can certainly make people feel like, you know, they're not alone. They're not, you know, trying to figure things out on their own, and you're there to help them and make sure they're part of the team, and everybody has a chance to win. And so, Shawn, I can't thank you enough to, you know, for your time being on the show, talking about all your expertise. Shawn is an amazing leader and is out there doing some great things, working with companies and helping them develop their leadership, and obviously on the public speaking circuit, talking about these things as well. Shawn, if people want to learn more, contact you, have them come and talk to their company, how do people get in touch with you, buddy?
The easiest way to do that, Jason, is to go to my website, and from there, all my social media links are available. And the website is just my name, ShawnDawley.com. That's ShawnDawley.com. ShawnDawley.com. Every page has all of my various social media links to it. So that's the simplest way. And I would love to connect with anybody who'd be interested.
Awesome. We'll also put that in the show notes as we do with all of our guests so they can make it easy for folks to find you on all the different channels that this podcast goes out over. And so if this was thought provoking and you want to learn more, guarantee you Shawn can help you from a leadership and an emotional intelligence standpoint, make your organizational better. We look forward to seeing you next week. We've got an amazing show next week for you as well. We're going to be talking about how companies can win bigger and better through retaining their best talent. And so I look forward to working or talking with you guys next week about that with some great guests that we have on in store they're experts in the space. You're going to learn a lot. Look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good day, everybody.